Ukrainian army carried out one of the biggest attacks of recent days on the Russian positions in the Donetsk region. Ukrainian army is trying to break through the Russian defense line to take Donetsk completely under control. Russian sources announced the start of rocket attacks. After the capture of Bakhmut, Ukrainian army wants to completely liberate Donetsk. Therefore, Kiev decided to send the Azov regiment to Donetsk. It was stated that Russian Defense Minister Shoigu was very stressed and sick during this process. Shoigu's images shocked the whole world. Big problems arose as a result of the defeats of Russian army. Inexperienced Russian soldiers cannot stop the Ukrainian attacks. After the mobilization, the losses of Russian army greatly increased. In the process, the last Russian unit in Bakhmut was also neutralized. Kiev wants to enter the winter months by declaring a great victory on the Eastern Front. Ukrainian forces have deployed large numbers of HIMARS and rocket launchers to the Donetsk border. After the attacks on Russian soil, the coordination of Russian soldiers in the region deteriorated to a great extent. Moscow announced the deployment of the Azov regiment to Donetsk. The intensity of trench warfare has increased more than ever before. United Nations warned all its members to prepare for a long war. In the early hours of the morning, Ukrainian army took action to carry out a comprehensive operation on Donetsk. According to the first statements, more than 60 missile systems were deployed on the Eastern Front. It was announced that Ukrainian army could carry out at least 200 attacks at once. However, like Moscow, Kiev does not want to run out of ammo and makes mistakes. Ukrainian forces carried out 21 attacks on Russian ammunition depots and military bases in Donetsk. All of the attacks were carried out with rocket systems. As a result of the attacks, a large number of Russian military equipment and more than 60 Russian soldiers were neutralized. Ukrainian army attacked Russian troops 7 days in a row in Donetsk. The capture of Bakhmut by armed forces of Ukraine significantly increased the number of operations on the Eastern Front. It was stated that Russian troops had withdrawn from the area. According to the statements, with the start of the attacks, Russian forces retreated 11 kilometers and began to establish new defense lines. Ukrainian forces continue to advance, carefully and slowly controlling the area, because it is known that a large number of Russian soldiers are hiding in Donetsk. According to the statements made, Russian soldiers continue to hide in many houses, official buildings, and private institutions. With Zelensky's visit to Bakhmut in the morning, statements were made that Russian soldiers would be completely evacuated. After this process, 2 major operations were performed one after the other. Also, as you know, ammunition depots and military equipment on Russian territory continue to be destroyed. Russian army began to experience a great lack of coordination, especially after losing Bakhmut. Kiev wants to turn this situation into an opportunity and deploy the Azov regiment to the Donetsk region. As I mentioned before, there are many inexperienced Russian soldiers on the Eastern Front. These soldiers were sent directly to the front after a short training. The vast majority of Ukrainian soldiers have been in training for a long time. In addition, with the start of the war, the entire Ukrainian army went through months of extensive training. In this process, Kiev wants to apply great pressure to the Eastern Front by increasing the number of specially trained soldiers. According to the published news, specially trained Ukrainian soldiers serving in the Azov regiment are stationed at a distance of about 20 kilometers from the Donetsk region. No direct statement has been made from Kiev, but trained soldiers are expected to enter the Donetsk region shortly. The arrival of the Azov regiment in Donetsk will greatly increase the number of casualties of Russian army. We know that the soldiers of the Azov regiment fought heroically in Mariupol and distracted Russia for about a month. But during the attacks on Mariupol, the military equipment and defense systems of Ukrainian army were largely missing. The new units now have military equipment equivalent to Russian armed forces. In this process, the fact that Ukrainian army was more educated started to make a big difference in the war. Russian army was quite superior in terms of military equipment at the beginning of the war. Despite this situation, they could not be successful on the territory of Ukraine and they had to retreat. The successive neutralization of experienced Russian soldiers led to the collapse of Moscow. Now the soldiers sent by Russia to the front are so inexperienced that they can be said to be uneducated. We'll see what happens when the Azov regiment arrives in Donetsk. On the other hand, operations resumed in the northeastern part of the Bakhmut region. A small number of Russian soldiers on the northern front were caught trying to cross over to Bakhmut from the east. Ukrainian army carried out a comprehensive operation against the soldiers in the region. As a result of the operations, 41 Russian soldiers were neutralized. The successive losses of Russian army greatly affected both Moscow and the Kremlin. In the past weeks, it was reflected in the photos that Putin was quite tired and sluggish. Many news sources claimed that Putin was sick. Western war experts made many statements about Putin's illness. In addition, statements such as confession about Putin's illness came from names close to Putin. Thereupon, it was claimed that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was also in bad condition. Putin met with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in the country's capital, Minsk. Speaking in the open part of the meeting, Putin said that they wanted to make a general assessment of the cooperation between the two countries, especially the economy, with Lukashenko. Among those present at the meeting was Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. The images of Shoigu walking with a slight limp in the corridor of the Belarusian presidential palace, hiding his right hand in his pocket, attracted attention. The media wondered how Shoigu, who had been on a working visit to Russia's southern military district the previous day and was supervising the troops, became like this within 24 hours. No explanation was given on the subject. In this process, the tension between Ukraine and Russia increased considerably. After the last statements and operations, we see that the negotiations have been completely suspended. After USA, very critical statements regarding the negotiations came from the United Nations. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said effective peace talks between Ukraine and Russia are unlikely to take place in the near future. I believe that the military conflict between Ukraine and Russia will continue, Guterres said at the UN headquarters in New York. Stating that serious peace negotiations should be expected, Guterres said, "We do not fall into the illusion that negotiations for real peace can be held in the near future." Guterres stressed that the peace negotiation efforts are aimed at other issues, such as Russia's pipeline exports of ammonia to a Black Sea port in Ukraine and accelerate the return of POS. On the other hand, President of Ukraine Zelensky announced that he will go to America to hold critical talks. Zelensky's first visit abroad will begin soon. According to the information in the U.S. press, Zelensky is expected to come to Washington to attend the joint session of the U.S. Congress and meet with U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House. On the other hand, the White House was expected to announce the content of military aid to Ukraine tomorrow. It was a matter of curiosity whether these aids would include Patriot air defense systems. Zelensky can give good news about Patriot weather systems. Tensions between the West and Russia continue to rise. We have come to the end of another video. In the coming hours, we will continue to convey the developments to you quickly and accurately.